Hey, this is Stuart, just letting you know that we had a few audio problems in taping this episode. The first few minutes, you might notice a difference. After that, it's as good as ever. Hope you enjoyed the show. Hello, my name is Stuart Muir, and welcome to Power Struggle. Today, my guest is Adam Pankratz. He's a lecturer at the Strategy and Business Economics Division at UBC's Sauder School of Business here in Vancouver, Canada. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure to be here, Stuart. Thank you.
Adam, we've known each other a long time. A lot of stories we're going to be able to tell and talk about today. I want to start by asking you about your international perspective, because that seems to run through the columns and the commentary, your view of Canada in this international setting, which I think is often lacking. You've lived in France and Germany and Spain.
Well, initially it was to study, because I did my undergraduate degree in languages and linguistics at Simon Fraser University, and then I wanted to carry on in linguistics. And I done a French degree with Spanish minor, studied German and Italian as well. And so the initial draw was educational, and I was fortunate that I ended up in a master's program at the University of Potsdam, which was relatively new at the time, but it was a program which focused on multiple language, both acquisition and study. So that was, to me, a really attractive program, because also on the practical side, I realized that when I graduated from there, I would have 4 languages that I could speak fluently. It was kind of the goal.
Now, from there, you built a career in banking, international business, academia, and you're also in energy and running a mining exploration company in British Columbia. And I'm curious to know, what was the spark that drew you into the energy and mining space with that background?
Well, again, some of these things happen by chance. So as you know, in 2015, I was a candidate with the Liberal Party of Canada in the riding of Burnaby South. And you know, I'd always been broadly aware, living in Canada and seeing the world, that, okay, energy mattered. But I'd say that I got much more focused on it all of a sudden, because that was a big issue in the 2015 election, because the Trans Mountain Pipeline terminates in Burnaby. And so that was an issue that, necessarily needed to be focused on or understand well as a candidate for whichever political party you were running for. And as I got deeper into it, in particular, I started to follow it, continued to follow it after the election. It became pretty clear that the stories that were being told about it, or being most forcefully put out in the media by those who were opposed in general, didn't seem to actually address the reality of what the situation was. And I think if there's any one thing to whoever's listening to this can take from our conversation about the energy industry, is just the scale and complexity of the problem, and the fact that politicians and many activists like to try to make it seem like a very simple solution with a simple problem with a simple solution. And it's not. It's incredibly complicated, and you need to understand, fundamentally how important this industry is and these issues are to our way of life before you can begin to advance deeper into the topic. And I found that just wasn't being presented, and there wasn't enough people who were calling out a lot of the nonsense and a lot of the missed half-truths, or sometimes flat-out lies that were making it to mainstream communication. And how can we have a rational conversation about it and stop swinging mud?
So you ran for the Canadian Parliament in the election of 2015. How did it go for you?
Well, the experience generally was fantastic. I mean, I'd lived in Burnaby my whole life, and there were every day I met a community group or a group of people that I had no idea existed in Burnaby, because everybody goes about their own lives and they don't see everything necessarily about the city. But in politics, that's necessarily your job, is you have to know everything that's going on. So it was a wonderful experience, learning experience about a community that I already knew really well. So that there was that side. Unfortunately, on election day, we didn't quite get across the the line. We lost by just over 500 votes.
The party you were running for didn't do too badly.
Well, the Liberals won a majority, so that was a nice consolation prize.
You've been known to speak your mind on all kinds of topics to do with energy and natural resources. I often see you out there when there's something brewing. What drives you to take on these tough conversations? And is there ever a backlash that you feel from it?
The simple answer is this issue is too important to not be grounded in reality, right? And so when I see political announcements or grand statements being made that clearly are either just not true or cannot be true, and the time at which some idea is going to be implemented, the person announcing it or the government is going to have zero responsibility for whether or not it will ever come to fruition, but they are creating actual harm to people right now because of what they're doing. I find that very frustrating. Take, for example, this electrical vehicle mandate that we've had come down, that there's going to be no more internal combustion engines sold by 2035. Now, that sounds very nice, right? And Stephen Guilbeault or the Liberals are never going to have any responsibility to see whether or not that actually happens. They're not going to be in office not until 2035. Maybe they'll be back by 2035, but they're not going to be there until then. So they're going to have zero responsibility for this. And on that issue alone, the complexity in terms of trying to make that happen is absolutely enormous. Starting with, where's the electricity going to come from? In British Columbia, we've been working on the Site C Dam, depending on where you want to take the starting point, but it really started planning for it in the 1990s, right? So we're 30 years about, and it's going to be 10 to 15 years of actual construction. And that dam is going to create, I believe it's 1.5 gigawatts. I forget the exact gigawatts of electricity, I think it is. So if you want to electrify British Columbia, which essentially is what these goals are designed to do, right, is electrify Canada. Well, you need 15 gigawatts. So you need 10 Site Cs, okay? So where are the dams going to come from, or where's the electrical production going to come from to meet these electrical vehicle mandates? Where is the grid capacity going to come from? Because we don't have that either. And even if you don't do it all at once, you don't electrify the whole province, fine. You're going to still need even one more Site C. Where's that going to come from? Well, I have no idea. And neither does anyone else who wants to immediately electrify or immediately push this energy change onto kind of an unsuspecting Canadian public, or at least they were unsuspecting until energy prices started to go higher and the cost of living started to go up, and now people are paying a lot more attention to this. We're still very fortunate that we have inexpensive energy in North America compared to my friends in Germany or England or France, where following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, energy prices doubled or tripled out of nowhere. And this was a serious issue for businesses. So we're not there yet, but that's the type of complexity and difficulty that I'm talking about. I was saying, well, at least you're talking about building one or two more Site C dams in British Columbia. That's a decades-long process. And you're talking about getting BC Hydro to up the grid capacity. That's going to take decades. Mm-hmm. So, I've said many times, why wouldn't you be in favor of greening the economy or greening the energy grid and electrifying more? That's a very laudable and good goal. Mm-hmm. You create renewable energy, no environmental impact. That's great. But let's talk in real terms that this is going to take decades, and everyone runs around talking about it's going to happen in the next election cycle or two. We're not very far from 2035. It sounds a long way out, mm-hmm. but it's around the corner. I mean, it's tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and I would add that not only does the federal government of Canada have that goal, but in British Columbia, there are policies here that are actually much more aggressive than the federal ones. The BC legislation was amended not long ago for British Columbia by 2030 to have 90% electric vehicles on the road. And British Columbia drivers have actually done a lot. There's a lot of early adoption, but still, it's more aggressive than California or the UK or anywhere else right here. So we might see some of the impacts that you're talking about occur on the west coast of Canada before they're seen elsewhere. assuming nothing changes. The framing you've provided is actually right at the heart of what we're doing with Power Struggle, because it is a struggle to get the power and energy in our lives. And here we talk about it in terms of the energy trilemma, which is an idea. It's like a dilemma, but there's, three dimensions to it. And those three are reliability. You want that switch when you flick it to result in the lights coming on. And you want it to be affordable so that people are not living in energy poverty, and you want it to be green. We all want these three things. And how do we get all that all at the same time?
Well, and it's very difficult, right? And I think this is where, the energy transition really is the right word to use for it, because we've spent more than 100 years basically getting addicted to fossil fuels. Well, you don't turn that around overnight, right? And we kind of know, in as close as we will ever know, what does the world look like if you shut off fossil fuels? Well, that was the first 2 weeks of COVID. Like, everything shut down. Nobody was using anywhere near the oil and gas. Like that is what the world looks like if you just shut fossil fuels off tomorrow. It stops. So we're not going to do that. Okay, so what then is the solution? Well, electrification certainly looks like it's going to be a very large part of it. But what happens as we're getting towards that? And this is where, non-renewables like natural gas, but that are less energy intensive than oil, seem to be a very viable and a very useful power source that Canada has a lot of. I mean, we've got 80 trillion cubic feet right now in the ground, ready to go. Well, that can power Canada and North America for probably a century. And we haven't even found everything that's there. And the United States has a ton of LNG too. So that looks to be a very good option in terms of lowering emissions and helping us get towards full electrification. But again, that intermediary phase, I think there's just a lot of either dishonesty or lack of realism in terms of how long it's going to take and what the complexities are and how much money it's going to cost too. A lot of politicians will just say, well, electrical vehicle mandate. No, well, in there, what you're implying is trillions and trillions of dollars of taxpayer investment ultimately that is going to be needed to get to where you think we should go, and you think that's going to happen by snapping your fingers. And that's just not realistic. And that's the part that always frustrates me, is when it's talked about like it's this easy problem to solve. It is solvable. We've solved many things over the course of human history, but it's hard, it's complicated, and it's expensive. And I just wish people would be more upfront about how hard and expensive it will be.
And here you are making these points, making these arguments. Do you find that rather than it resulting in the desired dialogue, it winds up being that you're vilified because, well, if you're not in favor of this solution that we are urging and requiring, it must be because you have some malign intention?
I mean, I get a little bit of that, but I think by and large, the feedback, when I talk about it with rational people and we just have conversations, most people kind of fall into this camp of, I am for greener, more renewable solutions, but I also don't want, and I'm not going to accept my quality of life going backwards, right? And if that's what you're demanding, well, then you're going to find an opponent. But if you're saying, here's the long-term solution, and this is where we're trying to go, and we're gonna get there and talk about it in a realistic manner, most people are on board with that. Right? There are very few people, I think, you would find that if you say, well, the long-term goal here is that we emit less and have less impact on the environment, it's a message most people are going to get behind. But what they're not going to get behind is what the extreme voices also are implying when they say, that we're going to hit all these mandates under a certain timeline. They're also kind of implying, deindustrialization in a lot of ways, right? And it's not a fantasy. I mean, Germany, Volkswagen, just a couple of weeks ago, right? They're shutting plants in Germany for the first time ever, and the reason for that is because the cost of running those plants is too high, and they can do them. They can run them more efficiently where the energy costs are lower, either in the United States or China or wherever else, South America, I think they have plants as well. And, this is, what's more German than Volkswagen or German cars, right? And these industries are struggling big time. And the reason is because their energy costs are so expensive and it's become uneconomical. Well, that's not the future that we want for our country either. So there is a middle road here, but, like a lot of other things in society, we're very polarized on these things at the moment.
Yeah. Now with Germany, they've lost access to the cheap natural gas from Russia, and they've had to import LNG, but they've also shut down their nuclear, which was in the post-war period the basis for that clean, green economy they were building. They shut that down too. And now they're burning a little more coal, or maybe a lot more coal. They're adding a lot of wind. Are they moving ahead?
So my answer would be no. My German friend's answer is no. That this is ludicrous, and all the more ludicrous from the news just this morning, right? That 3 Mile Island is going to get started back up, right, which was mothballed in 2019, I believe, but it's starting up again because Microsoft has committed to buying the power from that nuclear power plant as part of its green commitment and the energy required as we move into AI, which is going to require a ton of energy. And so Germany had all these clean, well-running nuclear plants, and for ideological reasons at the time, I forget now the exact composition of the German parliament 10 years ago, but the Greens essentially were one of the key support groups that the CDU needed to have, or Merkel needed to have, in order to remain in power. And one of their demands out of that was that they wanted the nuclear power plants in Germany shut down. And they got their wish. But as you say, the result is now they're burning more coal, which is definitely not cleaner than nuclear. And it's this backwards, or however you want to frame it, backwards, fictitious, ill-informed view that nuclear is this dangerous thing like on The Simpsons or something. It's not. I mean, nuclear can be very, very safe, and it could very well be a part of the green future, right? And next door, you've got France, where 70% of its energy comes from nuclear, and they do it quite fine.
Yeah. Does one have the sneaking suspicion that deindustrialization maybe is a higher value for those campaigning for these energy shifts than decarbonization alone? And no doubt, a cleaner, greener economy is what the Greens want in Germany, but deindustrialization maybe is the end to capitalism. That there are certain quarters of society that would see that as a high value. Do you think these are confused goals or intertwined at times?
Yeah, so I'm always, just because like you're asking if I get attacked, I get a lot of values ascribed to me because of things I've said. I'm always hesitant to ascribe what somebody is actually wanting without them saying it, although some of them do straight up say they don't want capitalism. So those people I believe.
So there's a bit of that at least.
Yes, there certainly are some people who believe that. My intuition is that it's just a misunderstanding of what they're actually implying. But the necessary implication of what they are saying and what they are advocating for, in the absence of some miracle technology that does not yet exist, is deindustrialization, right? And certainly there's a portion there. We just say, well, capitalism is the source of all our ills, despite the fact that capitalism has brought more people out of poverty and given everyone a higher standard of living than any other system ever devised. Let's put those facts aside for 1 second. That they are advocating for. There's a large portion who are, I think, advocating for a cleaner economy without, again, not understanding what comes with all of that if it's not done in the right way. And if it's not done in the right way, deindustrialization, just cutting emissions, is on the cards, is in the future. Mm-hmm. If you want to green the economy, and we haven't even talked about this one aspect yet, which is, well, you need a lot of metal to electrify an economy. And so where does that metal come from? Well, it comes from the ground. It comes from mines. You have to have a very robust mining industry in order to meet the electrification goals as well. And just off the top, how many people who advocate for a green economy or who say, well, we have to reduce emissions, how many of them are also, out in the street protesting and banging the drum saying, we also need to have more open pit mines? Not very many in my experience, right? There are not a lot of people who are out there saying lower emissions and start opening up mines, but you need to. There's no way around this, right? There is not enough copper in the world. There's not enough molybdenum. There's not enough nickel. There's nowhere near enough of this stuff. Well, all of this stuff comes from mines, and again, that is a part that is like that hasn't even entered the conversation yet. And slowly, in some quarters, like you see it a little bit, and the mining industry is trying to get people to pay attention to it and say, if you're gonna do this, you need metal, and it comes out of the ground. It doesn't come from anywhere else.
Well, you're more than an observer and commentator on this issue, Adam, because you're director of Rockmaster Resources. You're looking for copper and other metals in northern British Columbia, right?
Yeah. So Rockmaster is an exploration company, right? So we're a very small company. But this is an important industry, particularly in Vancouver. I mean, there's over 1,000 junior exploration companies, listed companies that are currently in Vancouver operating in some form. A lot of these exploration projects will not see the light of day and end up being mines, but some of them need to. And I forget the exact number now, but we used to have about 30 operating mines in British Columbia. Now we're down to 10. And the permitting time for these mines is incredibly long. Again, if you say that the numbers for electrification are quite staggering when you think of just copper production. So if we're going to meet the electrification goals for copper from here to 2040, we need to mine, and this is worldwide, okay? But what governments allegedly say they're going to do, we need to mine more copper between now and 2040 than we've mined so far in all of human history. So, okay, do we have the technology to do it? Yes, but this stuff's hard to find, and finding permitting, putting into production a copper mine, saying that we need it by 2040. Well, that's like saying, yeah, I need it tomorrow morning. These projects take more than a decade and cost, again, billions of dollars, are extremely risky, and need government permits and supports and all kinds of infrastructure in order to actually get that copper into a piece of wire, get it out, right, to world markets. So, if we're gonna green the economy, good. Well, then everybody who believes that, they had better also be calling their local officials and saying, what are you doing to speed up mining permitting times? And what are you doing to encourage mining investment, in British Columbia or in Canada? The government, to their credit, I want to only dump on the government today, they do have the critical mineral strategy. That's good. That's a positive step in the right direction. But we need more, and more than that, we need to, send a clear signal to the international investment community that Canada is a place where if you want to mine, or you want to extract resources, there's a clear pathway forward to make that happen, right? And you can't have regulatory changes and uncertainty. Otherwise, there's zero chance that anybody is going to come along with the tens, and it is tens at minimum, tens of billions of dollars required to get the mines and all these other projects to operational capacity.
Right. Now there's something like 17 mines in queue for the necessary permits just in British Columbia. So as you say, it's not for lack of there being a resource there. It is there. It is waiting to be developed. What are the barriers?
Well, I think it's a lack of desire to have and value these projects, right? That if you're in the Ministry of Mines in British Columbia, are you going out to your mine permitters? Are you going out and trying to find a way, like, how do we get this to happen as fast as possible? How can we, make sure that we're doing it in the right way, which we do, by the way, in Canada. We do it, we consult with Indigenous people. We make sure there's not going to be arsenic in the river, right? We make sure that these things are all mitigated and accounted for. But that the government, we're going into an election tomorrow on Saturday. Okay, the Conservatives are talking about it, but is the NDP, who's been in power now for 7 years, are they saying a key part of this for BC's economy, which is kind of struggling now, is going to be that we're going to figure out ways to accelerate the permitting of mines in Canada or in British Columbia? No, that's not what's going on. And again, if you're an international investor or even a domestic investor, and you're going to have to stump up hundreds of millions of dollars for the initial phase of a mine, are you going to do that unless you have real certainty that that the government, is going to be behind you? And if you start the process, that you're going to see this mine through, or are you just going to have hundreds of millions of dollars of stranded capital? Well, you can't do that. So people, are rightly worried about, putting their money behind these projects because they don't know what the government's going to suddenly decide to do and change the regulatory process on them.
Now, we need these resource products. We need the metals, just as we need other energy sources. We also need the economic activity that comes from doing that, because in Canada, this is the base of our economy, because we trade the things we produce, like metals, for the things we don't produce and need, be they iPhones or oranges. And that's how the world goes around. But it seems like it's really hard to get that message out. And this week is when all the mayors and councillors from around British Columbia gather in Vancouver. It's UBCM. And I've been talking to a lot of the local leaders. Incredible frustration. Officials who understand how their local economies work, they see the benefits. They know that mine are producing a lot of jobs and so forth, but they're frustrated. They tell me that those who live in cities aren't seeing the connections. Just try to explain in your way, what are the benefits to all Canadians and British Columbians from having this kind of activity that solves a shortage of materials, but also has another impact on their lives?
Just from a pure economic standpoint, for British Columbia, mining accounts for 25% of the value of our exports out of province, right? So a quarter of the exports that go out of British Columbia, those are mining. And how many, I did not come from a mining background. I didn't really think about mining. The only one I ever saw, and probably the only one most people see, is when they drive down the number 3 highway, they see Copper Mountain just outside of Princeton, right? And honestly, it's not the prettiest sight ever. And if that's the only impression you get of mining, you maybe think, no, I'm not sure this is the best thing. And I understand that view, because that kind of was how I grew up a little bit. Like, I saw this one thing on the side of a highway. But I think if you look at the value of minerals, to double check the numbers, but I think it's $43 billion worth of mine exports were in 2020 out of Canada. Mm-hmm. So $43 billion. That's a big number, right? That's that $43 billion that is sold to the world, or oil and gas too. We could throw that in there. I mean, they're over $50 billion, close to 100, I think, and an extremely productive industry, right? I mean, for every hour worked, I think to GDP, oil and gas is $700 an hour, and mining is up there as well. But these are very, very productive industries that we sell to the world so that we can buy the things we want, and also so that governments receive the royalties which pay for education, healthcare, roads, bridges, schools. All of this money flows back. I mean, the BC budget a couple of years ago was balanced because of its natural gas exports. And that was when natural gas prices had spiked and gone through the roof because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So these things make tangible differences in government budgets, mm-hmm. in people's lives, in taxes accrued, in value to the country, that we then can buy all the cool stuff that we want. iPhones, oranges, as you said, T-shirts, whatever it is. I mean, at the end of the day, Canada's economy is still banking and natural resources. That's what we do. That's what we're really good at. And if we start looking away from those very productive industries, well, we're going to see kind of what we've seen in the last 10 years, where our quality of life and our economic productivity flatlines for 10 years.
Mm-hmm. What do we need to do about that?
We need to start promoting these industries as industries that Canada does well and Canada can be a leader in, right? When we look out in the world, where are we competitive? And what is our competitive or comparative advantage in the international markets? It's not going to be manufacturing, right? That ship has sailed. We're not going to be a manufacturing superpower. Like when I go to China and you look around, you're just like, okay, we have no chance. This is not going to happen. But where can we be a real leader in something that we're already good at? We keep trying to chase down technology in the United States. Okay, maybe, but we have a built-in advantage in natural resources, in oil and gas, in mining, in forestry. And we need to lean into those industries, right? Because the world is not going to stop using oil and gas tomorrow. It is not going to stop needing metals for a very, very long time, and it's not going to stop needing wood products. So the way I like to think of it sometimes is if I look at the world and I think of, okay, when that day comes that the last drop of oil is used or drawn out of the ground, and there's been a progressive reduction in the size of the oil industry from where we are now, more or less 100 million barrels a day, and we eventually end up at a day where it's zero. Well, where do I want those last barrels of oil to come out of? Well, I want them to come out of Canada. And the reason that is because I know that then those last barrels of oil are going to be being extracted in a very environmental way that has looked at if there's any negative environmental impacts, has looked at Indigenous communities, made sure they're getting a fair share, and this is being done in the right way, right? It's not being done in a way that's polluting the river next door or is ruining a village or God knows what. Last drop of oil that gets pumped, I want it to be in Canada, right? And everyone else can shut it down because they're likely harming the environment or being a lot less careful about what they're doing than Canada is. And so I think we should lean into those industries. It's going to be good environmentally because we do things the right way, but it's also going to be really good for our economy and our quality of life.
It's an economic advantage, but it's also an energy security advantage. And I'm intrigued, especially with your international perspective on things, Adam, as to how the recent rise of energy security is a topic that everyone's talking about, especially since Russia invaded Ukraine, is something for Canadians to reflect on as to how we can fashion a role for a country that seems to be very challenged in a lot of ways, like productivity.
So on energy security, I mean, we are fortunate that we can produce the energy that we need, and that we're not going to find ourselves ultimately in a situation like my friends in Germany, where all of a sudden you have no options and you wonder, well, where is my gas going to come from? And I'm entirely beholden on someone else to give me that gas, right? And we saw Germany signing those massive LNG contracts with Qatar for 30-year takeouts and so on, because they lost the Russian supply. We're never going to end up in that situation, and that is to our great advantage because, again, where friends in London saw the price of their heating at that time go from £100 a month to £400 a month, nothing happened in Canada. Nothing happened in the United States either. We have oil and gas resources. We have the ability to produce energy. A lot of European countries didn't have that. So I think Canada, there's two sides to it. Like we're very lucky that we're isolated from it. We're lucky we're geopolitically probably pretty safe because we're next to the United States. So we operate in that ecosystem. But I think we also have a role to play there in terms of being suppliers of energy, oil and gas, natural gas, LNG, to our allies in sort of the Western alliance, that we can play a key role in making sure that Europe has its own energy security, if we're sending LNG tankers across the Atlantic. Well, we have enough of it. And if we're going to stand against countries which would otherwise, be our aggressors or our enemies, well, Canada has a role there. We're not going to be a nuclear power. We're not going to be sending massive amounts of troops in, but supplying key energy to countries which are maybe more on the front lines or do need that in order to make sure that they can play the roles they are required to play. Well, that's, I think, where we have a real opportunity to have, some global influence.
Mm-hmm. Yet in Canada, our environment minister, and this is a critique that you have raised, is seen by some as ideological and disconnected from economic realities. Is that a harmful situation?
Well, I don't think for Minister Guilbeault specifically, I don't think there's any question that that is the case with him. Mm-hmm. That you look at his past, you look at what he's doing now, you can see very clearly that this is someone who has a very clear axe to grind, and it's not limited development, it's not development done in the right way, it's no development, right? And that's really the only answer. Again, when I said I don't see the activists who want the economy to be green also yelling and screaming that we need more mines, well, this is exactly the thing a person like Minister Guilbeault should be doing, because he has the ear of cabinet, he has the ear of the prime minister, he has the ability to do it. He should be screaming from the rooftops loud and clear. Now, is he doing it behind closed doors? I don't know. But it seems unlikely based on the direction we see that the government is going and the mining industry is going. You should be screaming from the rooftops for all to hear that we need more mines, right? We need metal from Canada. This is where it needs to come from. This is the green future. And that's not happening. The only answer you ever get from him is no. No, you can't do that. No, you're not going to be able to do that in the future. But it's totally disconnected from reality. And perhaps nothing's more emblematic of that than when he was going to go across Canada by train to lower emissions. Of course, that's never happened because it can't happen in a practical manner. So he flies everywhere. Like, these are the type of things where he's like, yeah, it's great to grandstand and yell and scream whatever you want. But then when you actually have to implement a serious government policy and do something properly for the country, you're confronted by that thing you really hate, reality.
Sometimes there's a sense that, it's inconsequential. We'll make these decisions and things will be fine. But you can look around the world, and often this seems to translate to measures like bans or prohibitions. That's the way to solve the trilemma. We're going to ban this thing that looks like it isn't producing perfect results. So electric vehicles are not just encouraged. Internal combustion cars are banned. That's how EV uptake, at least in theory, is meant to work. And I just wonder what your take is from an economics point of view on this idea. Is that the only way that we can bring about the solutions we need?
No, I mean, absolutely not. And in the ban is weird. I wrote an article specifically about this, I can't remember, maybe a year ago, but it seems to be the preferred tool on many different things of governments lately, at least in the Western hemisphere or the Western world, where, they don't, again, like you said, they don't try to encourage a change in behavior. They just ban another behavior. And that's whether it's smoking or drinking or anything. But I'm going to ban this. Well, that is not going to work long term, and especially not if you're talking about such a major shift as energy, because the way to get people to adopt electric vehicles, to create a business environment or a situation wherein you can have an economically viable or a economically more attractive electric vehicle or electric solution to people so that they start moving it on their own. You're not gonna, and right now that's not happening, right? Like, Ford loses money on its electric vehicles. Ford is losing billions of dollars on its electrical vehicle production, and they've scaled back their production targets. A lot of companies have done this, right? They've scaled back. We can't produce these this quickly. We're losing too much money. It's not there yet. Okay, does that mean there is no future for EVs? No, there is. But it has to be economically efficient, economically attractive, not only to the companies, but also to the consumers who are going to buy them. And a country which has actually done a pretty decent job of this, I would venture to say, is Norway, right? Where Norway has lots of oil and gas and has lots of electric vehicles. And they use their oil and gas resources to fund that transition and that electrical vehicle network build out but they're not eliminating their most productive industry. They're using the money that it gives them to build out the electric infrastructure. So, why are we not doing that? Why are we not taking and encouraging, say, yeah, absolutely. We got 166 billion barrels of oil sitting there in Alberta. Let's get this stuff out to the world as fast as we can, get as much money for it as we can. And that money is going to go back into figuring out a way to make Canada's economy as renewable and as green and as efficient as possible. We're topical. We're having the election in British Columbia tomorrow, and someone asked me, what do I want to see in the platform? And I said, I want some party to write in their platform that we're going to create an attractive business environment, and we're going to get the hell out of the way. And we don't do that, right? The government is always sticking its nose somewhere in that process, and not allowing the market dynamics to work. And on these large questions, you have to get the market, an efficient market dynamic working for the consumer, the end consumer ultimately, and for these businesses to get the necessary investment, to get the product in the first place, and then to get it to be produced at scale at a cost that the customers are going to go out and buy it. And we're not doing that.
I'm trying to be an optimist here. 10 years from now, what could we be looking at if we get some things right? What would those be to get to a solution to these issues?
Well, I think it's a good thing to think about, because Canada's a rich country with a lot of smart people at the end of the day, right? And we have a lot of businesses and a lot of expertise which is able to address the problems that we're going to face in the future. The key here is that the government switch the narrative, I think, and switch the expectations that, I look at young people at the University of British Columbia that I teach. How many of them look at a career in oil and gas or mining and think, boy, I'd really like to be a part of that? I don't hear it very often. And the reason you don't hear it is because, as they say nowadays, those industries give a lot of people the ick, right? They don't, natural resources. I don't want to be in that. Well, mining is an industry of the future. If you're going down the green path, we got to have a big industry in mining. And I think we've got to shift this narrative away from it's got to be the green economy and move it towards, well, yeah, we're going to do that. But here's the multi-decade transition. And you can be involved for the next 30 or 40 years working in natural gas extraction, and you've contributed to limiting emissions because you extracted them responsibly and you limited the amount of coal and oil that went into the atmosphere, and instead it was natural gas. Is the problem solved? Are there no emissions? No, but there's less. And it took you decades. Yeah, because it's a complicated problem. And then your kids are going to maybe complete that journey. That message comes back again to realism and understanding the scale and complexity of the problem that we have, but also therein the opportunity. This is a problem that is solved by adults being in the room and saying, okay, this is really what we're up against. How do we get the best people involved in this, and how do we make it worth their while to solve the problem? And that's not happening right now.
Well, I have a sense if we do those things, we're going to be okay. So I do hope we're on that trajectory. We've shared a glass or two of wine over the years. Suppose you're on the doorstep in Burnaby and you discovered someone didn't have any wine background but wanted to be able to tap your enormous wine knowledge and wanted a bit of advice as to where they should start. What region, what vintage, variety might you steer someone into?
Well, the first thing I'll say, I think is the most important thing I ever learned about wine from working in the wine industry and from the experts therein, is it doesn't matter what wine you drink. It matters who you drink it with. Because you can drink the best bottle of wine in the world with people you don't really care about. You're never going to remember that bottle of wine. But you can have a bottle of Plonk, but with good friends in a good environment, and you'll remember that bottle of wine for the rest of your life. So however you drink it, make sure you drink it with good people. But I would say to go to regions where you wouldn't go at first glance for value. South America is very good, but in the British Columbia liquor store, actually, there's a very good Montenegrin wine that I always recommend because it's only $14, but it's worth at least a $30 bottle of wine in my view, and it's called Vranac, Vranac. That's kind of a little gem that happens to be in the BC liquor store, but other than that, I just say to people, the joy of the wine industry is that no matter how much you know, you never know enough. So the only way you figure out what you like is by trying lots of different things. And if you do that with good people, you're going to have a lot of fun and enjoy wine. And remember that it's there to be drunk and enjoyed, not to be scared of it. I find too many people are, they think they have to know something about wine. No, it's there to be drunk, and it's there to be drunk with people you enjoy. And if you do that, you're doing it right.
It is Friday afternoon. It feels like the next part of this podcast should be, we pull something out of the drawer and crack it open. Unfortunately, I haven't made that plan today, so we have to bite it off here and call this a day. It's been an incredible conversation. We'll link that wine in the show notes. And Adam Pankratz, thanks for coming to Power Struggle.
My pleasure. Thank you, Stuart.